This episode of Knife Chats with Tobias was recorded in front of a sleeping cat in a dingy recording room located in the world-famous Volcano Club. Take it away, Tobias.
I'm hoping that this does not come across as like a rant or an attack on any particular person or any a knife company or any company that sells knives or anything like that. That's not what the point of this is. It's really a look at some of the marketing ploys that have been used in recent years to sell traditional pattern knives, and where they basically have created some half-truths and myths about what's a quality traditional pattern knife. And I think much of what they said has been kind of unfair and very much misleading, all in the name of, trying to sell more knives, which in itself is not a bad thing. I mean, that's what companies do. They try to sell knives, and it isn't that they come out and lie. They're just not 100% truthful sometimes, and that's what I'm going to be looking at here. Now, I think where I'm going to start is with the Match Striker nail pull. That somehow the Match Striker nail pull is a sign of quality, and quite frankly, I don't believe that is the case. I also don't think it's something that you saw on a lot of older knives. Now, I got a ton of knives here. Here's a Great Eastern, and you notice it's got a long pull, but it's not a Match Striker pull. This Shatton Morgan, no Match Striker pulls on it. Here is a knife by Mercury out of Italy. Also, no Match Striker pulls on it. An old Imperial camp knife. No Match Striker pulls on it either. Same with this one. Here's a Case Scout knife. Again, you see there are no Match Striker pulls. A Remington Trapper made by Camillus. No Match Striker pull. A Camillus made camp knife. No Match Striker pull. Here's another Geck. Great Eastern. Long pull, but no Match Striker pull there. And here's a Case Barlow, no Match Striker pull. And a Linesman knife by Klein Tools, no Match Striker pull. However, the very first Scout knife I ever got had Match Striker pulls, and it was from Rough Rider. And another Rough Rider with a Match Striker pull. What about this one? Okay, this one is by Whitetail Cutlery, also made in China, but no Match Striker pulls on that one. But here's another Rough Rider with a Match Striker pull. You got the Marbles knives here with a Match Striker pull. Another German-made Boker here. No Match Striker pulls there. I contend basically, here's another one with a Match Striker pull. This is U.S. Classics, their Barlow. And this is Colonel Coon, a modern Colonel Coon made by Baron Son. No Match Striker pull there. Match Striker pull here on the Rough Rider. My contention is the Match Striker pull. While you will find an occasional knife made back in the 30s or 40s or so with a Match Striker pull on it, it was fairly uncommon. It was not something that was used a lot. I think Rough Rider popularized the Match Striker pull with their lineup of knives, and it has since been followed by other companies, particularly Marbles. And considering the Marbles are made in the same Rough Rider factory, I can see how that happened. Same with U.S. Classics. I think they were made there too. But to me, the Match Striker pull as a feature on older knives is a little bit of a myth. I think that is really something that you see on traditional pattern knives that are copies of old American knives that are now made in China. That's where I think the match striker pull really comes from. I do not think it is something, at least from what I've been able to see in the variety of knives that I've picked up from pre-World War II, the match striker pull is really a thing of rarity. It is not something you see a lot. But when it comes to traditional pattern knives being made in China today, you see a lot of them with the match striker pull. So to me, if you see a knife with a match striker pull on it, chances are it was made in China. That's my thought of it. Does that mean it's a bad quality knife? No, it just means that this is one of those myths that was created that somehow the match striker pull on a knife is something that was really popular at one time. I don't think it was ever really popular until Rough Rider made it popular. And if you like Rough Rider knives, or if you like match striker pulls, you're going to find them on a lot of Rough Rider knives. And so if you don't like them, you might find that as a problem with Rough Rider knives. But for me, I'm indifferent to the whole concept of the match striker pull. I do know that some people have a problem getting their finger into the slot of the ones with the with the match striker portion there. I do also know that I have tried it on Strike Anywhere matches, and it will work. So that's what I can tell you about the match striker pulls. I think you'll see it more on a modern or a traditional pattern knife that is being made in China versus older traditional pattern knives that were made in the United States. There, I said it. All right, next, let's move on to bolsters. Most of the time you'll find like nickel silver bolsters on a traditional pattern knife. You'll also find stainless steel, you'll also find copper and brass and all sorts of other materials used, but I think the most common material used tends to be nickel silver, and it's been that way for quite some time. Now, the purpose of the bolster on the knife is to add strength to the end of the knife and to make it less likely for whatever cover material is on the knife, less likely to crack or something, because it's at the ends where things tend to break and such. That's why you almost always will see a bolster at the pivot end of the blade or the top of the knife. Sometimes you will not see a bolster at the tail end of the knife, and sometimes you won't see a bolster at all, but usually you will typically see a bolster on either end, and it's to strengthen those ends to prevent them from breaking. This is the 4-inch toothpick, medium toothpick in the Black Widow line by, as you guessed it, Rough Rider. I'm not going to go into a lot about the R on the knife. What I'm going to do instead is talk about embellishments on the bolsters, because what you'll see is plenty of knives will have bolsters that are embellished in some way, or they will be slanted, or for instance this one is referred to as like a shell pattern. I like the shell pattern. A lot of people do not like the shell pattern or the starburst pattern, whatever you call it. But you see plenty of bolsters that have some kind of embossing on it, and that is not necessarily a sign of quality in a knife. What it is, though, is a sign that a company took the time to say, I would like to see something done with the bolster. And that is also something that was done by customizers for the longest time. They would take a plain bolster, such as what you see here, and then they would say, you know what, I'm going to work that bolster and make it look pretty. And so they would do something like that and do work on the bolster, you know, carving into it and everything else, and making a really nice looking bolster so that that knife would be customized to their own liking. and that also let them know that, hey, that's my knife. Well, knife companies obviously figured out, well, we can do that, and we can also just stamp them out and make them look cool and do it on a mass production level instead. So you end up having things like these Starburst on this six-bladed Congress with wonderful Stag handles from Whitetail Cutlery. And you also see, like on the Stroke of Luck here, with the worked bolsters here. These were actually found in the National Knife Museum at Smoky Mountain Knife Works, and they were put on this knife much later, in the 2000s. But they found the original castings for these bolsters and said that would look really good on a knife. So somebody in the 1930s came up with the idea of making bolsters like that, and then they brought it back to life. And obviously, doing something like this is a lot less money than having a knife customizer do it to an individual knife. So when you're making a production line like this, is this knife really is the value of this knife more than the basic bolsters that you see on this knife? Only in the fact that they did not use a lot of these bolsters. So this is the only place they used these bolsters in the Stroke of Luck series. So there was only, I think, 6 or 7 patterns of knives that had these on it. It was a limited run. Once it was done, it was done. And so the only knives that have it are those, unless you can find some from the 1930s that also have it. And that's how the bolster becomes more worthy of collecting or something. But I guess one of the big questions is, what's the difference between a ringed or threaded bolster versus a plain bolster versus a pinched bolster? Is there really a added value to having that bolster threaded or pinched versus just having a plain bolster? And I think that's a little bit of a trick question. Now, I don't have two knives that are exactly the same, but let's take a look at these two knives by Great Eastern Cutlery. One of them is in the Northfield Excel line, and the other one is in the Titty Ute line. This is in the Titty Ute line, and you see that it pretty much has a plain bolster. And this one in the Northfield line is triple threaded with a pinched bolster. And this one cost more than the one that was in the Titty Ute line. And part of the reasoning it does cost more is because of the threading and the pinching of the bolsters, which took a little bit of workmanship and everything else. Even if it's done on a machine, it does take a little bit more workmanship to do that. So yes, when you see things like this happening within the same company, yes, it is like a value-added item to the knife. But to say from one knife company to another knife company, like, well, Frost doesn't thread its bolsters. For instance, here's a Black Hills Steel Scout knife, but Rough Rider does thread its bolsters, so the Rough Rider is a better quality knife. That's really like trying to compare apples to oranges, because this has a threaded bolster, does that mean it's also better than the old timer knife, or even the Case Scout knife? You see what I mean? If Rough Rider turned out one of these without a threaded bolster or a ring bolster, they used to refer to these as a single ring bolster. If Rough Rider turns this out without a threaded bolster or a ring bolster, they might have been able to do that for a little less money. But they decided to put the embellishment on there to make the knife look a little bit better. and and that's really what they did. And so it used to be that almost every Rough Rider knife made would have that single ring, and it was one of the ways you could identify a single ring a Rough Rider knife. It would have the single ring bolster, whereas most frost knives did not have a ring bolster. And the thing is that's nothing new, because Camillus had been putting a ringed bolster on their knives for a long, long time, as opposed to Case, which rarely has any kind of embellishment on the bolsters. So that was more, I think, the purpose of it. Different companies, often the lower priced companies, would end up doing some kind of embellishment to make their knife have a little bit more bling than the more expensive knives that basically didn't need the bling in order to show their quality. Now, that's not to say that Camillus were bad knives. I like Camillus knives. They were the knives that I used to always collect and buy. So, I prefer those over Case. But it's not to say that they were a better knife simply because they had a ring bolster. And you see here, the Cub Scout knife did not have a ring bolster because, well, they didn't see the need to put it on an entry-level knife. But other knives, they put the ring bolster on and charge a little bit more for it because it took a little bit more to do it. So that's where, to me, the embellishments on the bolster come in. It shows a little bit more attention to detail within the brand. It doesn't mean that brand is better than another brand. It means that within that brand, if they've done some embellishments on the bolster, they have made that knife a little more special than their regular knife. And one final argument you'll see a lot on, and this is truly personal preference, when it comes to Stockmans. Some people just prefer a square bolstered Stockman over a rounded bolster Stockman, and the same goes for Barlows. I like a squared off bolster on a Barlow. This one's slightly rounded. It's more squared off than you see on a lot of other ones. That's, like I said, this is a Colonel Kuhn made by Baron's Son. Here's the Case one. It looks a little more squared off, but it's the pinching up there helps to make it look more squared off. But you can see that it is definitely more squared off than the round bolster you find on a Rough Rider. And that's what I like to see. I prefer a squared off bolster on a Barlow. And that's purely personal preference. It isn't a sign of one knife being better than the other or anything like that. Same thing with the Stockmans. It isn't that a squared bolster is going to be a better bolster than a round bolster. I think that's purely personal preference, and that's why knife companies, especially Case, offers round bolsters and square bolsters, but you will see a lot more rounded bolsters coming out of Case knives than squared off bolsters, because guess which one sells better? Yeah, most people prefer the rounded bolster. That's why when you see a squared off bolster like this, a lot of people will grab it real quick because it's just a little different. But the rounded bolsters are probably the more popular. I'm indifferent. I like them both. Let's see, move on to something else.
And now for a brief word from our sponsors.
Oh, honest, it's just iced tea. Some of the best 12-year-old iced tea I've ever drank also. Good stuff. Hi, all you knife chatters out there. Your old pal Skip the Show here, coming from you. I'm gonna have to get me some more iced tea, I think. Coming from you from the Volcano Club. And have we got a deal for you this week? Or month? This month, we got a great deal for you this month. Sponsored by Knife Chats with Tobias. Obviously, that's why we're on this show here. where we're talking about truth in advertising. Oh boy. Anyway, come on down to the Volcano Club this month. Bring your cracked ice with you. This one here is an Imperial cracked ice cigar whittler. Got this big old long blade here. Look at that. It's got 2 pulls on it. Must be some quality stuff there, right? Then it's got 2 little blades down here because it's a whittler. I would be able to open them up if I wasn't wearing my sunglasses. Got that blade there, and got this other blade over here. I can cope with this knife, I tell you that much. Anyway, bring your cracked ice to the Volcano Club and get a drink on the rocks. How's that? Get your favorite drink on the rocks compliments of Knife Chats with Tobias. Honest, I wouldn't steer you wrong. Skip out.
We now return to our show.
Okay, this one is probably one of my favorites. Does this have it? Nope, it doesn't. Man, that knife is a really classy looking knife. I thought for sure it'd have file work on the back, but they didn't bother to do the file work. But look at how nice those 3 back springs are. Man, is that good and tight? No gaps or anything on there. That is just beautiful. And then we have this knife over here. This knife has file work on the back. See that? Wonderful file work. So this obviously must be a better quality knife because it has file work. You're paying lots of money for that file work. No, you're not. This is not true file work. This is not... someone did not sit there and do this filing. This was done... it was cut by a laser and then slapped into the back of this. Is it file work? I guess you could say it's file work, but it's really a laser cut back spring. And the same thing is going for this knife. And sometimes you're going to have really good laser cut back springs, and other times you're not going to have the world's greatest laser cut back springs. Does it look nice? Yes. Does it take a little bit more time to do that? I suppose it does, but there's also one other thing that this file work cannot do, and that is hide flaws in the knife. Now here, it's looking pretty good. It's pretty tight and everything. So there's probably no real gapping issues, but if there were any gapping issues, the file work would help hide it. On this knife, I can feel the recess of the spine, and it's very difficult to see any gapping on the file work, but there is some gapping issues between the liner and the back spring, but you can't see it, and that's one of the good things about file work on an inexpensive knife is it can hide flaws. So that's what a lot of really inexpensive knives do. They put file working on a back spring, not because it makes the knife more expensive or anything. It just helps to hide the flaw of a poorly positioned back spring. Just something else to think of. Now, when you're talking about higher end knives that have file worked back springs, those things, the file work is done by hand, and it is meticulous work, and it does add more value to the knife, and that is something where that embellishment is done by a craftsman as opposed to a machine. On a $20 knife that has file work, it's just laser cut steel that's been slapped on the back, pretending to be the back spring. And in some cases, people think that it actually weakens the back spring, so it's not the best thing to find on an inexpensive knife. Just food for thought. Now, if you follow any of the knife groups, there used to be a lot of discussion about the blade steel, and specifically 440A stainless steel out of China versus 440A stainless steel from the United States, and so on and so forth. The difference between Chinese steel and American steel, difference between German steel and Chinese steel, so on and so forth. And the real discussion went around the quality of the steel. So basically, like, not all 1095 carbon steel is 1095 carbon steel, or same quality. And the same thing with the heat treatment, like they talk with Buck, and it's 420 HC with the Boss heat treatment versus other companies 420 HC. And there is truth to all that depending on the amount of impurities in the steel and everything else, different steels are going to be a better quality steel, even though they're the same grade. And so it's more important to base your trust on the steel of the knife blade based on the brand more than the type of steel it is. So Rough Riders 440A stainless steel is not going to be the same as like the 440 steel that you found in an old Camillus knife. It's not going to be the same 440 steel that you find in necessarily that you find in a knife made by Baron Son. And actually, this knife, this Colonel Kuhn, actually uses 420, not 440. It says so right on the Smoky Mountain Knife Works website. Case's True Sharp steel has changed over the years. Right now it's a 420 high carbon steel, which is supposedly very similar to the steel used by Buck. I don't know. I have no problems with Case's True Sharp steel for everyday uses. And that was something that somebody, I can't remember if it's Thrifty Kniffy or somebody else, who always says that his 80-80 rule or something like that, that it's a steel that 80% of the people who are using it are going to find the steel perfectly suitable for 80% of the things that they're doing. I have a feeling it's much higher than that with both 420 and 440A stainless steel. I think for 90% of the people out there who are grabbing a knife for everyday use, that steel is going to be perfectly acceptable, whether it's a 420 or 440 coming out of China or the United States or Germany or wherever. I think all of those steels are going to be just fine for everyday use, where the need for quality control in high-end steel or super steels, where that comes in is where you're doing more than just the typical day-to-day tasks that most people do. That's where steel comes into play for importance. So if all you're doing is collecting knives, chances are the steel that is in that particular knife at that price range is probably going to be just fine for you. However, other materials on the knife are going to vary greatly, and that's where you have to be careful. So here we have Rough Rider's first attempt at doing a turquoise handle, and it looks pretty good. I like the way this looks. Here's a later one. Doesn't look quite as good. This one doesn't look nearly as much like turquoise as this handle does, and that's because this is a synthetic resin, or possibly just a plastic handle. It's not even the same as the turquoise that you see on the on their Stonework series. This is probably the better looking turquoise, even better looking than in the Stonework series. So you can see there, the spider veins in that turquoise look pretty good until you show it up against this knife. So why did the Rough Rider stop making this one? Well, from what I understand, the reasoning behind it is while both of these are supposedly a synthetic stone, this one has a higher amount of turquoise in it, maybe. I'm not sure. But whatever the case was, it's a more brittle stone, and it had a tendency to crack and break and chip. And well, they were, that's not what you want in a knife handle, something that breaks easily. So they basically stopped making these, and they looked for a new way to come out with turquoise, something that would be a little more durable for the handles. And so they went with this synthetic stone instead, so a more durable material. So even though these knives costed a little bit more, they were not as practical to use or carry. And so that's a problem when you start looking at synthetic materials. How durable is the handle? And sometimes you just have to switch out. And fortunately, with most Rough Rider knives, they have this one and done kind of series going with it. So they made these once and they were done with it. And when they finished with it, they never had to worry about the fact that this stone was not as durable as they wanted it to be. And you see that with other knives too. But the thing is you don't notice it as much with just bone. One of the most common comments I make, and I've heard other people make, is just how pretty the bone looks like on a case knife. And they have such wonderful looking bone. The way it looks, the way it feels in the hand, the way the edges are turned and everything else. It's like they're an expert at doing bone. And there's more to it than just that. I think the other thing that people are missing is that Case selects premium bovine bone. They use a specific type of bone when they're making their knife handles and stuff, whereas other companies are not necessarily doing that. I know if you find a Great Eastern knife with the bone handle, it's going to be a premium type of bone as well. Same with Old Queen knives or like the Shatton Morgan. The bone is a quality premium bone. You're not going to find the same quality of bone in a knife on a $15 pocket knife. It's going to often be a thinner bone. It's going to be a more brittle bone. Might not be as strong of a bone, and so it's more it'll have more tendencies to crack and everything else. And this is just a fact of life. You're getting what you're paying for. So while it might look good to begin with, it may not be the best quality bone on the knife. And often it'll be a little thinner and so on and so forth. So it might look good, but it might not wear as well as the bone that you find on like a case knife. It's kind of like saying this knife is made to last for 4 or 5 years, whereas your case knife is meant to last your lifetime. Now, it doesn't always work that way depending on how well you treat your knife, but the thing is it is something you have to consider. Yes, both knives have bone handles. This knife has a wonderful bone handle too, but the quality of the bone in this knife is not necessarily the same quality of bone that you find in a case knife or a Shatton Morgan knife or something of that nature, or a Boker or something of that nature. So that is something else you have to consider. And that is how they keep the price down as well. The quality of the materials going into the making of the knife are not as good as a higher priced knife. At least that's my opinion, and that's also been my experience. And that even goes to when they start talking about composition, yellow comp and stuff. Case uses Delrin. Other companies use composition, yellow composition. So it's a thermoplastic. It's not necessarily Delrin. We throw around the word Delrin like it's just a generic word, but Delrin is a specific type of thermoplastic. It's a higher quality plastic than what you're seeing on this Colonel Coon knife, and that's why a Delrin knife of the same style from Case is also going to be a little more expensive than one from another company, because the handle material is most likely better. The same thing with micarta. Not all micarta is the same grade of micarta. I've talked about that before. There's paper micarta, there's denim micarta, there's linen micarta, there's all sorts of different burlap micarta. Not all micartas are the same, and depending on who's making it, it could be crappy or it could be really, really good. And while we're at it, let's just talk a little bit about Stag. First of all, one of the biggest questions out there, what is stag bone or bone stag? It is bone. It is cattle bone or camel bone or some kind of bone that has been jigged to look like stag. Different companies do it differently, but what it always is it's bone that has been cut to look like stag, cut and dyed to look like stag. That's what a bone stag is. It is not stag in any kind. It's like Stag-A-Lon is some kind of a composition material or thermoplastic that is molded to look like stag and then dyed to look like stag. And a couple different companies use other names for it, but that's what, if it isn't genuine stag, they're not going to say it's genuine stag. They'll stag bone, Stag-A-Lon, imitation stag, whatever you want to call it, but it's not real stag. Okay? Case uses a couple different stags. Their premium stag, if they can get it, is India Sandbar stag. And that is probably the best stag that you're going to find on any kind of knife, is India Sandbar stag. It is the hardest of the stag materials, unless you go into some types of elk or moose or something like that. But typically it's India Sandbar stag, and you can find some very old knives with India Sandbar stag on it. This is one, and typically the stag used by Great Eastern Cutlery is also India Sandbar stag. They do a little bit of a different dyeing on it than Case does. I actually like the way the Case knives look over the way Great Eastern Cutlery does its stag, but both of them are using normally India Sandbar stag. Case has now been using a red stag, which is some other kind of deer antler that is dyed red. It's not the same premium grade of stag that you find in the India Sandbar stag. Not that it's bad stag, it's just that it is a different grade of stag. And here's an early Rough Rider knife in stag, and that was their first run of stag knives. Compare it. It does not really look that pretty, but it is stag. And then their second run had a better quality stag on it. The first knife I got in stag, I looked at it and was like, man, that looks like a crappy piece of tree bark. I don't know why anyone likes it. And later on, I got actual stag from Cases. Like, now I know why people like it. And this is a really nice looking stag knife by Case. It's by Rough Rider. So you will find some decent looking stag, but I do not know where it began life. I don't know if it's India Sandbar or what. So I don't know how tough this stag is. And other stag here. This is also stag that's probably some kind of antler. I don't know what kind, but you can see, is it in the same ballpark? No. And it actually kind of looks a little waxy in some spots. So stag will vary from knife to knife. Just because somebody says it's a stag doesn't mean it's a top quality stag. And so this is something you've got to remember when you're looking at knives. Not all stag is alike, not all bone is alike, not all thermoplastics are alike, not all micartas alike. Simply because a company says, hey, they're using this, does not necessarily mean it's quality. It just means what they're using. I guess what I'm trying to get across to at the end of the day here is that you need to be very careful and separate what are basically marketing ploys and sales pitches versus what makes a good knife and what makes a not so good knife. Why a budget knife might look as good as a higher price knife. or a premium brand knife, but not really be as good as that premium brand knife. There's a reason why certain knives cost what they cost, and it isn't always just coming down to, well, this one's made in China and this one's made in the United States. It comes down to a lot of varieties, and a lot of it comes down to the quality of the workmanship, yes, but also the types of materials used in there. And like I said, not every 440 steel is going to be the same grade. And you have to realize that just because a knife can slice through a piece of paper when it is brand new coming out of the box, and another knife that costs more did not have that same effect, it doesn't necessarily mean that that higher priced knife was not as good as the low priced knife. It means that the lower priced knife just happened to have a better edge on that day. Will that lower priced knife be able to retain that edge? Will it be able to be worked back up to that edge over time as it is used? Once you get a nice sharp edge on a higher priced knife that did not have the best edge when it first showed up, will it perform better than that lower priced knife that was working really great in the beginning but isn't so much anymore? Is that bone going to crack faster than the bone on a different knife? So a lot of it comes down to the reputation of the company and the quality of the materials that that particular company is using. And the only way that it really gets determined is through use and experience. And that's why so many people out there, one of the knives that you're not seeing here, but still remains world-renowned and recognized around the world, is the Victorinox Swiss Army knife. And it's because it has remained a constant. The quality doesn't change. Well, it might change a little bit here and there. The materials change a little bit here and there. But for the most part, the knives remain consistent over time. You know what you're getting. And that's where knowing the brands helps out a lot. Knowing what you're getting from the brand. And so, if anything, what's more important than anything when it comes to collecting knives is knowing the reputation of the brands and knowing what you're going to get from that brand. Yeah, I know some people are complaining about case knives today. Other people will knock every knife coming out of China no matter what. Other people have problems with certain knives currently being produced by a particular company and so on and so forth. But you need to look at the track record of those companies and from there start making your decisions on your knife collecting or the knife that you're looking to buy, to use. At least that's the way I would hope to end this with. And typically, you're not going to get that information from the sales pitch of the people who are trying to sell you a knife, especially if it's their brand. Trust me, anyone from Case is going to tell you theirs is the best knife in the world, just like anyone from Rough Rider is going to say, yeah, we're a great knife and our steel's better than Case. And I'm leaving the rest up to you, I guess, at this point. But I'm just letting you know that don't fall for the sales pitches. You're going to have to do a little bit of research, know the brands, know the quality, and realize that not all bone is the same quality, not all steel, even if it's the same grade, is the same quality. Not all Stag is the same Stag. In any case, with that said, I will let you go. I know this has been a long run. I hope this was not a rant. My point was to kind of explain or give some tips on how to think about collecting your knives, not rant against any particular thing. With that said, I gotta definitely go. My battery's dying anyway.
And that brings us to the conclusion of another exciting episode of Knife Chats with Tobias Almost Live. If you liked what you saw, give us that thumbs up and leave us a comment. We always like to hear from you here at Knife Chats with Tobias. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next exciting episode of Knife Chats with Tobias is up and running. But thanks again, and we'll see you soon.